Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Evans. He is a project coordinator with FWCS. So he works with all the Fort Wayne community schools. So I'm gonna have him kind of tell you a little bit about himself and what he does. So Mr. Evans, if you wanna kind of introduce yourself for us.
Sure, thank you. My name is Zach Evans. I'm a coordinator in our facilities department here at FWCS. So I work for FWCS. I've been here about 8 years. I'm a registered architect. I did that about 10 years before coming on board for the school system. But my job is to work with architects and engineers and plan and supervise our construction projects. So you guys have probably heard about some upcoming work at Miami. We've done similar projects at about 15 other schools, but we also do a lot of small projects, so including locker replacements. Sometimes we just go in and install a secure vestibule or a chiller or replace some cabinetry that needs fixed or flooring. So there's a lot of small projects that we do during the summers, but also some large projects that we do over 2 or 3 years. So it's exciting. There's always work to do. We have about 63 buildings that we maintain. 51 of those are school buildings. So it's a lot of square footage to keep track of, but we have a good team here. We also have a maintenance crew that can take care of some small issues. So we don't have to call in a contractor for everything. We have a internal maintenance staff of about 40 gentlemen. Those guys stay busy every day. So excited to be here. I brought along some images of some locker drawings and a little brochure about some of the products we use, and also talk to you about how we bid projects to contractors. So how we get our partners, because we work with all different companies all over town and even some out of town. But looking forward to sharing it with you guys.
Yeah, so pretty much any kind of construction project or anything that takes place in a Fort Wayne Community Schools building is always run through your department.
Correct. So even if our cafeteria team needs a new cooler installed or something's going on at the natatorium that needs work, like if a pump goes bad for the pool at the natatorium at Southside, those directors or principals or whoever's in charge of that unit would call our department and ask for assistance, so we'd step in and figure out what needs to be done and help make sure it gets done right and on time.
Sure. Will you explain for us a little bit about what a contractor is and how that connects with what your role is?
Sure. So there are different types of contractors. We have each company or contractor usually specializes in a certain area. So a plumbing contractor would have plumbers. They also have mechanical. You know, if you guys have seen ductwork, the sheet metal, it's usually above the ceiling. That would fall under mechanical contractor. So we have those. We have electrical contractors. They're electricians. There are general contractors who typically do concrete and carpentry work, but they also supervise all the other contractors. So there's one in charge on site. Usually that's the general contractor. Then there's a whole array of specialty contractors. There's some gentlemen that only pull data cables. So where you guys plug in your computers, there's a cable that has to run back to a closet that has equipment in it that's connected to another closet with equipment and a data line and service. So there's some contractors that only pull cable. So each project is made up of a combination of these different contractors. But it all comes under one contract, and you're responsible for making sure all those folks are getting their work done on time, on budget.
Sure. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our agenda. I know you wanted to share a little bit about the general bidding process, and this is a kind of a new term for us here in 6th grade. Most of us have not really heard about a bidding process or anything like that. So if you would talk a little bit about that, and then the differences between, I know you wanted to share the differences between public and private projects. So.
Sure. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see here. All right.
Perfect.
See the photos there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So these are just as an introduction, this is These are recent photos from Shawnee Middle School, which is interesting because Shawnee Middle School out on Cook Road has an almost identical floor plan layout as your school. So these were built right about the same time with the same layout and same type of equipment. So we're in a current project now renovating Shawnee, and these are pictures here on the left is of their renovated locker room. They're still not complete. They still have ceiling tiles to put in, but you can see the new lockers, what those look like. There's some interior lockers, some perimeter lockers. On the right-hand side is the corridor, and you can see they have, excuse me, lockers here along the left side. There's still some work to be done along the floor. You can see those are full height lockers with combination locks on them. So I just want to start out with that. There's a pretty long process that we go through to hire architects and engineers to help us design these and we want to make sure everything meets code requirements. We also want to make sure everything meets the needs of the school and the students that are using all this equipment. So when we're talking about lockers, we're currently working with an architect, a few other middle schools to replace lockers. And we're talking, we've hired them. They went in and measured these spaces already. So the first step is to hire a designer, whether it's an architect or engineer, and they will help plan the project. So we give them our criteria. They will ask questions, offer different ideas, and kind of brainstorm with us, and we settle on a certain scope of work. So here's a little comparison. I'll go through the private bidding here on the left first. So if the big difference between the two types of bidding is how the project is funded. So if it's your money, so if you have money and want to hire somebody to build a shed in your backyard, you have a lot of choices on who you hire to do that and what amount of money you pay them. So if you want to spend $100 and have a shed built, you can do that. If you want to spend $10,000 and have a nicer shed built, you can do that also. With public bidding, which is the column on the left, these are public entities that use tax dollars. So your parents pay taxes, and some of that money comes back to the school district, and we have to use that money very wisely. So there are extra rules and steps we have to take to make sure that we're being as responsible as we can be. But private bidding happens, say your church is typically, they would bid things privately. They have a lot more flexibility in how they go through the process. So under private bidding, the first step is to measure, learn about the situation, what problem you're trying to solve, and plan. Go through the planning process either with yourself or with a designer. And then the second step is to make a presentation on the best value. So I want to highlight best value. That doesn't mean it's the cheapest or the most expensive. It could be in the middle. This is where your creativity comes into play. So
if I can just ask, so it's kind of like when you go to the store for any kind of shopping, like if you're wanting to buy a new pair of shoes or a new bike, you're not necessarily wanting the most expensive, but you don't necessarily want the cheapest. You're looking for a good value, like you said, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So if someone asks you to, usually you're competing against other people. A lot of people will try to get at least 3 bids to get a good range of ideas and cost. But there's a lot of ability to think outside the box with things. So if you're thinking about lockers, it could be how many lockers. Maybe you could reduce the number of lockers and save money that way. Maybe you use a different layout of lockers, a different size locker. But there's a lot of possibilities. And then you would make a presentation to the owner or whoever's in charge, explaining your reasoning, your cost and your schedule. And then the owner can either choose yours right away or they can negotiate. They could say, well, we really like your plan, but we heard a couple things we like from these other pitches. We'd like you to incorporate those and come back. And so you negotiate until you come to an agreement on what the best course of action is for the owner. Then you'd sign a contract and order the materials you need and work on installing it. So that's the private bidding scenario when you're using private dollars or your own money. On the right is the public bidding scenario. And a lot of these steps are the same. You'll see until you get down to step 5, there's an extra step in there. So, and then item 3 changes a little bit. So we still go through the learning process. We try to learn what the problem is, try to solve that with a design solution. And that's with an architect or engineer. We would then issue drawings and specifications. I've included a couple examples of those in upcoming slides. With public bidding, we have to be very specific in what we're asking. So we need contractors or companies that are bidding on the projects to be bidding, we call apples to apples. So we have to be specific enough so they know exactly what product they're using and getting quotes on to submit to us. So we spend a lot of time putting together the drawings and the written specifications to issue for bidding. And then when we receive bids, almost always we are required to take the low bid. So we have to be really sure we're getting what we want during that bidding process. So the low bid would win the contract. So we'd sign the contract then as long as everything was included in their bid. And then this extra step here, number 5, we call them shop drawing submittals. So in our bidding specifications, a lot of times will include multiple products. So like for the grocery store instance, we could say, okay, we want 3 boxes of cereal. You know, in our specifications, we would say we either want Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, or Corn Flakes. Those are all acceptable. So during shop drawing submittals, the contractor, the successful bidder, would submit which cereal he's providing. So we knew exactly what type of cereal we were getting, how many ounces was in the box, where they're ordering it from, and then we can check that, make sure that's appropriate and meets our criteria before they order it. So you think about a large building project, there could be 100 or 150 of these shop drawing submittals. Every light fixture, every wall tile, every carpet tile, the pencil sharpeners, everything comes into us. So it's a lot of work for the architect in our office to make sure we go through that and are getting what we want. Then step 6 is the same. We would sign off on those. They would order those materials and then install it according to their schedule. So really the big differences are in the public bidding, how we run these construction projects is the low bid wins, and then we also have the shop drawing submittal process to confirm what materials we're getting. This is a floor plan drawing of Shawnee Middle School. And you can see it looks, if you're familiar with the layout of your school, this looks really similar. I'll zoom in here and show you the corridor locker drawing, how this is shown for contractors to look at.
And this is similar to the drawing I think that you sent us of Miami. And so we spent some time yesterday kind of looking at that floor plan drawing a little bit and looking at some of the details. So I would love to hear kind of how you use these drawings and how these are helpful for your work.
You'll notice the biggest difference is the drawings you looked at were drawn by hand. So the computer wasn't used. That was drawn in probably 1973, 72 and 73, and they were issued in 1974. These were just done a year or so ago. They're all done by computer now. And a lot of these drawings are part of a 3D model. So architects and engineers are actually drawing everything in 3 dimensions, and then the software will create these plans for them. They add all these little tags. So this little note here that says A22 would reference new corridor lockers, and it also referenced a specifications section that had written instructions on what these should look like: sizes, shapes, how they're constructed, what color they are, how they're numbered. You can see this plan also will have tags. This is an elevation view. So this is cabinetry here. This little arrow shows that we're going to show a vertical view of the face of those cabinets. And this is the drawing number and sheet number reference. So this is kind of a great starting point for contractors as they're looking at the new layout, what's included, what's not included in the project, and then references to other sheets and parts of the bidding documents to get more information. So a lot of things in here are pretty general. You don't see a lot of dimensions or measurements on this plan. Those will be shown in other areas. But right here, these are the lockers shown in here. You can see at the end, there's a note. The architect included a note says indicates double tier lockers. So that would mean where we have these cross hatch lines, they would put two locker doors where we normally have one. So there'd be two shorter lockers instead of one full height locker. So that's an example of a floor plan. Here is the sheet that some of those are referenced to. These are locker elevations. So these are vertical views as if you were looking at the face of the locker bay. So these are of the Shawnee locker room. This is the girls' locker room. Zoom in here a little closer for you. So you can see here, at the end, we have a 2-tier locker. And right next to it, we have a 6-tier locker, and we alternate. So the purpose of this is to allow students in PE to use these smaller lockers because they typically just have shoes, shorts, and a shirt in that locker. And then these 2-tier lockers would be athletic lockers. And it helps us give some space in between those two different functions because the PE lockers will be used during the day. And then these 2-tier lockers will be used after school typically. So you can see there are notes up here about dimensions and how many tiers are in each locker bay. They also give a count of the number of lockers and overall dimension of the run. So how long that whole section of lockers are. So each bay of lockers will have its own elevation. You can see on the sheet there's other details. Down here, here's a door and window elevation of the media center. So you see this locker replacement project is part of a lot larger overall project. This is just a component of it. See if we have any. In the boys' locker room, we have a slightly different layout on a couple of the walls. Here we have a 4-tier locker. So overall, it's 5 feet, 4 inches tall off the floor. And there's 4 tiers, so 4 lockers. So just over a foot each tall. They're 18 inches wide.
Is this okay if we have a question that's kind of about these
Sure.
lockers and these drawings? So Joseph had a question a little bit about this. So Joseph, will you go ahead and ask your question, please?
So I'm wondering if, like, is there any models of the schools, like cardboard models or whatever?
We don't have any currently. Typically, if a new school is going to be built or a large addition would be put on a building, the architect would create some type of physical model. A lot of times they're study models to get an idea of how it looks, but more and more these days, everything's done digitally. So there are several pieces of software that architects and engineers use now that provide lifelike 3D renderings of new and renovated buildings. So we don't see a lot of physical models anymore. I know when I was in college, we still built a lot of physical models out of foam core and balsa wood. And then we also did some electronic modeling on the computer, but it was still pretty early. But a lot of architects still do physical models, and those can take a lot of time and a lot of effort by several people. Great question. I can tell you on the lockers that the locker vendors will make mini lockers as samples. So instead of bringing a full height locker in, they may bring a little short one that's a quarter of the size of a full size locker. So those are pretty neat to see. Some of the window salespeople will do the same thing. They'll bring a little mini sample of their product. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, and that's what, as part of our project that we're going to be working on, our groups are going to be making a model of their locker. So it's kind of interesting to hear that that's really what locker companies that specialize in that are really making models to show potential customers like Fort Wayne Community Schools as well.
Exactly. So I wanted to throw this, this is a typed document. This is part of the specification manual. So this is half of the bidding documents that contractors get. We have the graphic drawings and we also have the written specifications. So this is just the section on the metal lockers. So let me zoom out a little bit so you can see a little bit here. So it starts out in the beginning, has a little summary. It says, hey, this project includes single and double tier knockdown corridor lockers. So knockdown is just a style. They're putting them in a recess. So they come in pieces so they can fit them in the recess. And then the second type of lockers are welded athletic lockers. So these are the little more heavy duty. They come all put together. And you see we have 5 different sizes of lockers going in a project. So this gives the bidding contractor an idea. There may be a contractor that can't make a welded locker. So then he wouldn't be able to submit a price on this project. But most of the locker manufacturers can. This section 1 here will go through all of the requirements, all the submittal requirements. They'll go through warranty information, how to store and deliver the lockers. Here's a little warranty section. So you can see it says 2 years from substantial completion. That's the end of the project. And then we have a lifetime warranty on the welded metal lockers. So these are all requirements that the contractor has to make sure he meets before he submits his bid. So part 2 gets into the actual product that we want. So here it says we want everything to come from one manufacturer. Helps us make sure that everything's going to jive together, fit together, and the installation will go more smoothly. There's some performance requirements. Those are code requirements. A little more specific items. So we sometimes on some projects will allow different manufacturers. At Shawnee, we've decided we just want to have DeBorg Manufacturing make our lockers. They're the top of the game. They're the heaviest duty locker. They have the longest warranty. And we feel that that's probably the best thing to put in our middle schools. So we've told them, hey, we want you to get a price from DeBorg. Here's how thick we want all the metal. Here are the sizes we want. Here's how we want our louvers created. Here are the type of hinges that we want. I'll skim. This gets pretty boring, but they have to make sure they meet every single requirement in here. We have locker color information. And you can see that just this section is probably about 12 or 13 pages long. Here's fabrication information. We even have a section on installation. Here's execution. This is how we want the lockers installed. So have to make sure that they're not racked or crooked when they install them. That nothing has scratches, that they put the appropriate fasteners in. So it's very detailed. But all this is required because contractors haven't done some of these things in the past. So these things have to be included to make sure that we're providing all the appropriate instructions. I wanted you guys to see that.
I love how it's very detailed, and there's they have to think through really every aspect of it down to every screw they're going to use to install things, right?
Right. Yeah. They have to know. And there are estimators that work for these contractors that will read through all this and make sure that they're providing a cost and allocating money for all this. Because if they say this whole locker package is $200,000 and they leave out all their fasteners, that could be $6,000 or $7,000 that they miss.
Sure.
And
I know that for our project, we're not going to need, a 12-page detailed, but we are going to include some of what you guys are seeing in our locker project and in the bids that you guys create. So not to this level of detail, but we are going to be including some of this. So.
Right. And if your locker design has a special type of hinge, or you want the hinge on the top instead of the side, and those are all things that you would want to type out, in written form to give the contractor and show graphically and in your model. Uh-oh. Bad parameter. All right. This is a drawing of Jefferson Middle School. This is a project I ran several years ago. They also received locker room and corridor lockers as part of their project. So this is a different architect and engineer. You can see how they noted their lockers here. This is their academic wing. So here they show all the lockers and all the little pull handles, and then they have a 10.01 and a 10.02 tag. And those are 2 different locker styles. You can see here's the classroom door. This is their science room. Has 2 doors in it. And in between, they have all their corridor lockers. This 10.02 is a full height locker. So at Jefferson, their corridor lockers are 2-tier lockers. So they have a top and a bottom locker, and different students will have those lockers. And then there are 2 locker bays that are full height right by each classroom door. Those are for classroom assistants, since they do not have a lockable wardrobe or any other accommodation. In the wintertime, if they have a coat and a purse or some lunchbox they want to put in a locker, we give an assigned code out to them to utilize those lockers. So that was one of the design criteria we implemented at that school. That's not always typical, but we had extra locker spaces and thought that would be a nice thing to do for our classroom assistants and substitute teachers. Zoom in here. These are the locker rooms at Jefferson Middle School. So here, this is the boys' locker room. This is the PE locker area, and right above it is the athletic locker area. So here, they're somewhat separated into 2 different zones, so they have 2 different locker styles. So you see here, all the athletic lockers were full height lockers. So you can see they're all 1 tier or single height. And then we have combinations of 3-tier and 4-tier lockers throughout the rest of the locker room. So it just gives you another idea how another architect showed these graphically. You see there's not a lot of notes on them because those are all in the specification manual and the written instructions. So I mentioned shop drawing submittals in the public bidding requirement list. I want to show one of these. This is from the Jefferson project. And you see here, DeBorg Manufacturing Company. So on this large sheet, they're showing 2 different locker bay layouts with all the specific information for each bay of lockers. So you can see here, they give the overall height and width, what type of top, what the opening size is, how many are on the project, what the latch style is. So every little detail about them. And these red marks are from our architect. So he went through the drawings and specification manual. And you see he made a markup here. They showed 2 ceiling hooks. So our architect said, no, we don't want those. We want wall hooks. So you can see he changed the quantities of the ceiling to wall hooks. He also clarified what the lockers are going to sit on down here. It says base by others, advised height. So nope, we're going to use the existing. So that way the contractor knows that we're not making any changes to the raised platform that the lockers sit on. So this is also a large document that usually gets reviewed by hand and then scanned back in. Let's see if I can scroll down to their page. Here's another diagram. Here's where we showed how we wanted the lockers numbered. So each locker has a number tag. If you think about your locker that's assigned to you, it has a number. We have to tell them where we want them to start and stop, and also what direction to run the numbering so they're manufactured and installed properly. So you can see all these notes on here. We gave these back to the contractor. They made the modifications and brought the lockers out the way we wanted. This is actually a page I installed. These are the corridor lockers. So I provide a little sketch here of how we wanted the locker numbering to start and stop, and how we want to make sure the even numbers are on top and odd numbers are on bottom for ease of assigning these to boys and girls. I included the floor plan for your school in this presentation. It sounds like you guys have already went through this in some detail. I just want to point out this is Unit A. Right here is a key plan of the school split into 2 halves, Part A and Part B. So this is shaded in here as Part A. And you can see the corridor lockers are shown and tagged here. Then in the bottom corner, there's a detail of each of the 4 types of lockers. I think I didn't provide an enlarged copy of that. So you can see that some of the lockers are 12 inches wide with a metal base. Some are 18 inches wide and some are 2 feet wide. It looks like they all have the same height, all 6 feet tall, but each one's laid out differently. Back in the early 1900s, there were very few drawings put together. So a lot of contractors would build off of a set of 8 or 10 drawings. Architects and engineers didn't have to communicate all the little details. The contractors just knew what to do and took care of it. These days, we have to provide a lot more written and graphic detail to make sure that the contract is as explicit and clear as possible. Every project, there are conversations about, what our intent was and what actually happened, and we have to try to work those out and improve for the next project. I thought this drawing may be helpful. We had this in our records. This was from 2000. So this was 20 years ago, where we had a project where we just painted your corridor lockers. This drawing, it shows how many lockers you have on your first floor and second floor. It says there's 336 sets of lockers on the first floor and 206 on the second floor. It gives a basic locker elevation that's typical and shows what needs to be taped off and how they wanted it painted. So I thought that would be interesting. So you can see we keep lockers for a long time. They don't get changed out every 10 or 12 years. We keep them for several decades. If they start to get a little scratched up, we may come in and replace a couple doors or repaint them. That's pretty typical. As I mentioned earlier, those athletic lockers have a lifetime warranty. The corridor lockers are a little shorter because they're different.
So as they're designing and thinking about the design of their lockers, they should be thinking about not just what the needs are now or what the trends are now, but like thinking about the future, because these will be the lockers that are here for the long haul.
Right. Yeah. These typically, when we're designing these renovations, we're trying to think 30 or 40 years down the road. So, at high schools, my oldest son is in high school now. A lot of high schoolers don't use their lockers very often. They kind of dress for the inside weather. They don't necessarily want to take a coat with them, either on the bus or in the car to school. And they'll take 3 or 4 classes worth of books with them and maybe stop by their locker once each day. So we have to take that into account when we're designing these lockers, trying to think what's going to happen in the future. This is a page on the DeBorg Locker website, and this may be a good thing to review. There's a brochure that'll kind of give you an overview of this product. This is the product that we like for our hallway lockers. They also have a separate page for their locker room lockers, athletic lockers. But this also will give you an example of that specification, that written specification in Word document. They also have a PDF file if that's easier. But these websites have a lot of information on the sizes available, the different lock styles, and all the options they make for their lockers. And there are a lot of them. You'll, if you know some of these renovated schools, if you're able to visit them, we typically provide combination locks on the hallway lockers, but we don't provide a lock on the athletic lockers, and we ask students to bring their own padlock or have a school-provided padlock. Each summer, one of your custodians will go through all of the hallway lockers and change the combinations. You probably didn't know that. So if you come back next year and try your locker again, that your combination won't work in it because someone has spent all that time going through and changing all those to get ready for the next school year. So we also have to, take that into account. Is there an easier way to put a new combination in? Because that would save a lot of time and effort from our custodial staff. So that completes the slides I brought. I'd be happy to take any other questions or talk about any other topics you guys are interested in.
Yeah, I know we had some questions here, so I want to kind of go over those questions. So I know you kind of addressed this first question, and this is from Tavar. So Tavar, I'm going to put your question in the chat box that you wanted to ask. So Tavar had a question. I know you kind of addressed like the blueprints and how they've changed from being hand drawings to being computer drawings. Tavar, will you go ahead and ask your question for us, please?
I had the question of why was the blueprint so hard to figure out the coordinate doors and the locker room doors?
And so how do you, his question is kind of, how do you make sense out of all of the details and all of the things on the blueprint?
That's a great question. We usually start at a pretty high level. So right now we're actually planning to replace lockers at 4 middle schools next summer. So right now we've went in and kind of measured what they have now, and we're starting to talk to the principals and coaches about how they see their needs changing. So normally we go back, all the hallway lockers, we're probably going to keep full height lockers and kind of maintain what we're doing. But when we get in those locker rooms, each school has a different combination of athletics that they're currently involved in or planning to pursue. So we have to talk about what types of things need to be stored in those lockers and what size they need to be and how far we need to spread those out to make it work well. There's another type of lockers in schools that we haven't talked about, and that's music lockers. So a lot of the band areas have to store instruments, and they want to be able to see those instruments. So there are companies that just make music lockers with the little cages on the door so you can see in there. So that's a whole nother type. And for music areas, we have to get an inventory of how many instruments they have and what type they are, what size they are, how many students need to access those. Do they need to be in the public student hallway, or do they need to be in a separate room that's under a locked door? So it's a lot of conversations and time to plan and trying to ask the right questions and get the right information so you provide the right type and style of locker.
So a lot of it is really kind of thinking about the purpose of the locker and kind of what the locker is being used for primarily. And so our students for this project are going to have to think through, what's the primary purpose and what are the basic things that are going to need to be in the locker. Jaden had a question. His question was, how do you decide what materials to use for the locker?
There are a few different types of materials. Typically, we use the steel lockers. Steel's cheaper than some of the other materials. It's also easier to paint and repaint, and it provides a pretty good, pretty long warranty period. So that for corridor and athletic lockers in schools, just steel or painted metal is pretty much the standard. Sometimes for music lockers, you'll get into a laminate, kind of like a countertop material, a plastic laminate over a wood for some of those boxes, and you have metal grills on the front. But those materials are pretty standardized between the manufacturers. It'd be hard. You'd probably have to have a custom shop make anything else. If you wanted a diamond plate steel or an aluminum locker, it'd be difficult to find something off the shelf that someone offered, but you can find someone to make that for you. We actually had a little problem. If you've seen some of the construction sites, there are those large storage containers. They look like big trailers with doors on the end. Well, they have a bottom on them that sticks up about 4 inches. Well, we have trouble rolling our big carts and things into those, cafeteria tables. We have to roll into those sometimes to store. So we actually hired a contractor to make diamond plate steel ramps that would fit at the front edge of those. And we had about 6 of them made. And we've been using them for 6 or 7 years now, and they work great. But that wasn't something you could buy. We had to kind of sketch up and draw a ramp that was the exact size to fit in. The container was the perfect height off the ground with handles on the side so we could move it around. So now our warehouse department has those ramps, and we can have them brought out to any school to use. So that was a problem that we had. We brainstormed together to figure out what we thought we needed, put some information together, and had a craftsman build those for us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Haley has the next question for us. So I'm going to have Haley go ahead and ask her question.
How do the contents, can't read it.
You mean the construction companies?
Yeah, the construction companies decide how long it will take for a project?
That's a really good question. So for our projects, we have to do most of the work during the summers when you guys are enjoying your summer vacations, because it's not something we can do during the school year. We make too big of a mess and make too much noise. Some of our projects have work that go on during the evenings. So we do tell our contractors that they have a certain amount of time to get projects done, but they have to confirm that and make sure that the amount of work we're asking for could get done in that amount of time. So I mentioned before, we have general contractors that are kind of in charge of all the other specialty contractors. The specialty contractors will tell the general contractor about how long their part of the work takes. So if we think of something simple, a nice simple example, if let's say our project is sharpening a pencil. So you have a contractor that's going to take the pencil out of the package and then give it to another subcontractor that's going to put it in the sharpener and turn. Each of those people can tell the person in charge how long it's going to take to do that task. That's kind of what happens. And they build a schedule to figure out how many days or weeks or years it's going to take to finish all the components. And there's a certain order things have to go in. So if you think about if you're going to paint your room at home, you have to take everything off the walls and get everything clean, and you'd paint it and you'd put everything back on the walls, right? You wouldn't want the painter to come in first and paint over posters or paint over your light switch covers, right? So the general contractor will make sure everybody's doing their task in the correct order. But that also takes time, and you have to put in a little bit of buffer because we have holidays and some people are sick. And right now with COVID-19, if someone's sick, they could be gone for a couple weeks, or more. So there are subs that can come in and try to help fill in where we have gaps. But that's a great question. There are times where we get ahead of schedule a few days. We don't get too excited because we know we'll have something that comes up that causes a few day delay. But we work hard to make sure that we stay on schedule and we have the schools ready for you guys when you show back up.
Yeah, and I imagine that if there's like an emergency type project of like, a boiler goes out or an air conditioner stops working or something that's like structure of the building, that's going to take more priority over something else.
Exactly. Yep. If we have an issue like that, we had part of a roof get torn off during a storm a couple years ago. That was at Lincoln Elementary. We've had boilers or other equipment. We had a water heater catch fire and smoke one time in a mechanical room. Those things, we kind of drop everything and we call whoever we need to get out there and take care of the problem right away, and everything else just kind of waits. But typically the contractors are still working on the other jobs even without our direct presence on site. So I don't spend all my days at one job site. We have several projects going on all the time. So I kind of stop in every day or two to visit with them. I also talk to them on the phone and by email, and we have regular meetings where everyone's together. We're doing them on Zoom right now, just like this, where we talk about schedule. We talk about each of their concerns or problems or things that are holding them up, and we try to put our heads together and find out ways to get back on track and make sure we do the job the best we can.
Yeah, thank you. Nin has our next question. So Nin, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Which question is that? Because I wrote down many.
The one that I just put in the chat box that you asked the other day.
Okay. What problems do you run into while working on jobs?
That's a good question. There's all different kinds of problems. Usually it's something, we find something above a ceiling or in a wall that we didn't expect. So it could be extra piping. It could be a hazardous material. We've opened up walls and found pipe insulation that needs to have a special contractor come in and take out, which causes everybody to kind of stop until we get that addressed. There's one we might find interesting. 2 summers ago, we had a large project at Southside High School, and it was to repair the brick around the exterior. And so part of it was we were replacing all the mortar joints between the bricks. So there's a contractor that was grinding out the mortar, another one would come behind and put in the new mortar, where they called me and said, hey, we have to stop because there's a nest on the ground. and there are big eggs in it. And I thought, what could that be? So I went over there, and it was a duck, like a mallard duck that had built a nest in the ground right up against the wall where they were trying to work. And the guys made a little box and put over it so nothing would fall on them. And I tried to call a rescue group, like a volunteer animal rescue. And she said she wasn't capable of taking, I think there were 6 duck eggs, and the mother was still coming back overnight and sitting on them. And so I ended up calling animal control, and they sent me to the DNR, which is Department of Natural Resources, which is a government entity. And I talked to one of their lieutenants in the law enforcement division, and we had to sign a permit and relocate those to a nearby green area. So there's a pond close by, so that we had to move the contractor around them and keep going, and then come back and work in that area later and try not to disturb that nest. They did tell me that was a federal offense if we intentionally damaged any of the eggs. So we were very careful. But that's the only time that's happened. That's totally different. You don't learn about that in school. You don't learn who to call, and no one else had ran into that before. But you just have to, take a deep breath, think about what the right thing to do is, and make phone calls and try to there's someone out there that will help you, find an answer and get things taken care of. But we all work together and kind of minimize the delay in that area and stayed on track.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's just a lot sometimes that you discover while, like, to kind of relate it back to our locker projects, you could take out the old lockers to install the new ones and discover something else behind the lockers that might prevent you from installing the new lockers right away or something like that.
Exactly. And I looked through your drawings, I didn't see them, but at a lot of our buildings, we have roof drain pipes that will run in the locker area. So in that vertical area where the lockers are, there will be a 4 or 5 inch wide pipe that will run through that's carrying water from the roof down to the sewer drain. And sometimes they have locker doors over them. So it's a surprise. If you would get that locker number and open it, you'd have a big pipe running down through your locker.
Right.
Makes it unusable. So sometimes we do put a locker door over it because that's the easiest way to access it and cover it, and it looks good from the outside, but we don't put a number on it, or we won't put a latch on it so that we know it's blanked off.
Wow. So we have a few questions, just a little bit about what you do specifically in your role as a project coordinator. Because I know this is certainly a career. You are obviously a very successful individual within Fort Wayne Community Schools. And so if anybody's thinking about a career as a project coordinator or in the field of engineering or architecture or any construction field. So Elena has a question kind of about that. So Elena, will you go ahead and ask your question that I put in there for you?
How long have you been working for this, and is it hard, and do you get tired?
It's a great question. I think everyone gets a little bit worn out at certain times in their jobs. So I went to school for architecture at Ball State. It took about 5 years. That was the length of the program. And then afterwards, I had to work under another architect, kind of like an apprentice, for about 3 years. And then I had to go through 9 different exams to get my architect's license. So I have a stamp. So I'm certified by the state to review and stamp drawings. So I maintain that. I worked as a private company architect. I worked on schools and libraries and restaurants and all different kind of things for about 10 years. One of my favorite projects to do each year during that time was to work for FWCS. So I was a consultant that the school hired to work on some of the renovation projects. And then when they started doing the bond work, I came on board, and I've been doing that for about 8 years. The jobs are pretty similar. Instead of managing and putting together all those construction drawings and specifications, I used to do that myself on the computer during the day. So I would go out and measure things, design it with a pen and pencil, then put it into our CAD software and put together those construction drawings and then popped in at job sites when the contractors are working. So my job now is similar. we hire the architects, so they put the drawings together and we review them. So I still, every once in a while, will sketch things out and send it, to one of the architects on what we want to see, or make corrections on their drawings, or offer other information that helps them put together a better design for us. But I do get to spend a lot more time out in the schools and meet teachers and meet some students and work with our maintenance team. And so I'm involved a lot earlier in the project and a lot later in the project. I get to go back to buildings that we finished, 5 or 6 years ago and see how things are going, and talk to the principals and see what things we can improve on. Our summers are the busiest time. So, right now I'm planning for work for next summer. So we'll do a little work over Christmas break, but we're starting to plan for next summer's construction work. But during the summers, we might have each coordinator or each person, like in my role, will have between 5 and 10 projects that they're working on. And so we're driving around town all day, walking job sites, and it's hot. Most of the schools are working and don't have air conditioning, or we're outside walking on the roof or walking around the outside looking at windows or brick repairs. So usually during the summer is when I'm really worn out by the time I get home. A lot of the days can be pretty long. We usually work a little more than 8 hours a day, usually between 9 and 12. We start early in the morning when it's cool, but it gets pretty warm. When you get home in the evening, you're pretty wiped out. But we know that's only for 8 or 9 weeks during the summer, and we're getting a lot of work done, and things are happening quickly. So it's exciting. We plan all year for that time. It's kind of like if you guys plan a vacation all year, all school year, you plan your summer vacation, and you finally get to summer vacation, you're worn out running around doing all your fun things, but it's exciting, and you're anxious to get there each year. So, yeah, great question.
Yeah, and so Jasmine was wondering what you kind of already answered, I guess, maybe your least favorite part about your job, but what would you say is the most favorite part about your job?
Oh, it's probably seeing students and staff come back into a building, and I'd be surprised at the improvements that were made over the summer or over a break. So, some of the classrooms have really old yellow lighting. The paint's really yellowy. The floor might have cracks in it and look dirty. And to be able to go in and refresh all those finishes, put new LED lighting in, improve the speakers, put a nice new floor in. It's really exciting to see students and staff come back and see the work that was done over the summer and be able to use it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had for you, and that's all the time that we have. So I know I want to thank you so much for giving some of your time to help us think through the beginning stages of this project. And I'm kind of excited to see how we progress through this project as we build it together as a class. And so my other 2 classes in math will be watching this interview as well and getting some good information. But I want to take some time and just thank you for your time today. So I'm going to unmute everybody. If everybody can give him a 10-finger woo on the count of 3. So everybody, 1, 2, 3. Woo! All right, so there is your 10-finger woo from Mr. Throop-Voors math class, 3rd period. So thank you again, Mr. Evans, for being here today.
My
Do you
pleasure.
have anything else that you just want to add as any final thoughts?
Sure. No, I appreciate you spending an hour. Let me
Whoop,
crack
you're
your class
muted
for an
still.
hour. Oh, can you hear me now?
We can't hear you yet. Oh, there we go. Go ahead. I'm
All right,
sorry.
perfect. No, I appreciate you letting me crash your class for an hour, and look forward to see what you guys come up with, and maybe we'll be able to incorporate some of those ideas in our future projects.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you so much. And
Great.